Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Testing, testing,
Test.
1, 2, 3.
Testing
1,
1 2
2,
3.
3. Testing, testing, mic testing. Mic testing.
Mic test, mic test.
Test, test.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome everyone to the Penang Institute. To begin this evening's proceedings, I'd like to ask Dr. Uy Kibeng to give the welcoming remarks. Dr. Uy.
Thanks, Fawaz. A bit low. I've grown a bit during the MCO. You see. Okay, thank you, Fawaz. Good evening, everyone, friends of Penang Institute. Thank you for coming to this special event this Saturday evening, and welcome to a physical get-together. What a joy to see everyone in person again. But please take the precautions that you think are necessary, individually. But first, let me take the opportunity to tell everyone that we will be having a few events in the coming weeks, all physical. So keep yourselves updated through our website, our social media, and our emails blast. Now, on the 30th of May this month, the famed anthropologist, Professor Janet Carston of Edinburgh University will be here to speak about marriage transformations in Malaysia. That will be on the 30th of May. Then 2 days after that, on the 2nd of June, 3 days after that, 2nd of June at 4 p.m., Professor Euston Kwa, a Penang boy from Penang Free School, will be here to discuss the importance of cost-benefit analysis, cost-benefit analysis with all of us. And this is something quite special. From the 11th to the 19th of June, Penang Institute will be hosting a pottery exhibition right here in this room during office hours in collaboration with the Penang Pottery Club. This will be launched by the Chief Minister, Tuan Chow Kon Yeow. So mark that down. Busy times ahead. The pandemic is almost over, as you can see. Now to the matter at hand today. We are very, very honored to have Tan Sri Ariff Yusof here today at Penang Institute to discuss with us the 2 years during which he served as the Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat in a parliament dominated by the Pakatan Harapan. Equally an honor for us is to have here today the Member of Parliament for Bukit Mertajam, my old young friend, YB Stevenson, who served as a much appreciated Deputy Minister of Sport and Youth and Sports during those promising months from 2018 to 2020. Welcome to both these honorable gentlemen. Now, unlike most of us, Tan Sri Ariff Yusof made full use of his time during the pandemic to write about his time as Speaker and to inform Malaysians in great detail about the goings-on in Parliament under the second era of Tun Dr. Mahathir as Prime Minister, this time fronting Pakatan Harapan. Tonight, we discuss and publicize Tan Sri Ariff Yusof's book, Parliament Unexpected, in which much of the hidden workings of the Malaysian Parliament are revealed. And who better to discuss the book with him tonight than YB Stevenson? So thank you, both of you, for wanting to do this, and at Penang Institute. Moderating the session is Penang Institute's new project researcher, Encik Fawaz Abdul Aziz, to whom I now hand over the floor. Fawaz, the floor is yours. So thank you. Enjoy the evening.
Good evening again. Unlike Dr. Uy, I kind of grew less over the pandemic. Again, thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you for everyone for being here. My name is Fawaz Abdulaziz. Again, as Dr. Uy mentioned, I am a researcher with the Penang Institute's History and Regional Studies program. And I'll be moderating this evening's event. May I call upon Tan Sri Ariff to take his place on the stage? And also Yang Berhormat Stephen Sim Chi Kyong to take his place on the stage as well.
Wait for the speaker to take his seat. Oh, you choose your seat.
Again, thank you for attending this launch of the book Parliment Unexpected Recollections of Parliament, Politics and Pandemic in Malaysia, authored by Sri Ariff Yusof and co-authored by his son, Lutfi Hakim Arif. Lutfi, can you raise your hand so that we can recognize you as the co-author of the book? And also to all of you who have logged into this event through Facebook or YouTube, thank you for being with us. By way of introduction, allow me to briefly relate some aspects of Sri Ariff's biographical record for those of us who do not know him already. Tan Sri was among the founders of a party called the Parti Nasionalis Malaysia, NASMA, a party that is now inactive. In 2004, he ran under PAS for the Kota Damansara state seat in Selangor. Several years later, he left PAS and joined Amanah. Upon graduating with a bachelor's and master's degree in law from the London School of Economics, Tan Sri lectured for 11 years at University Malaya from 1974 to 1986. He founded his own legal firm, Messrs. Chang and Arif. From 1993 to 1996, he was the Securities Commission's first director of its Market Supervision Department. In 2008, Tan Sri served as Judicial Commissioner of the High Court of Malaya, became a judge of the High Court of Malaya before retiring in 2015 as a Court of Appeal judge. It was while spending his retirement years as a legal consultant to his partners in Messrs. Chang and Arif that Tan Sri was called on by Pakatan in 2018 to serve as Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat of Parliment Malaysia. YB Sim, as many of you already know, is a member of Parliament for Bukit Mertajam, the National Organizing Secretary of the Democratic Action Party, and formerly the Deputy Minister of Youth and Sports in the Pakistan government from July 2018 to February 2020, as Dr. Uy has already mentioned. YB Sim has been contributing to Penang Institute in various capacities for more than 10 years, including from the time that it was the Socioeconomic and Environmental Research Institute, or SRI. He is now a member of the Board of Directors of the Penang Institute. If I'm not mistaken, YB, was it your birthday yesterday? So here's to wishing you a belated happy birthday, and may Malaysia have many, many more years of benefiting from your contributions to the country and its peoples. YB Sim will be discussant of Tan Sri Ariff's book and of his address this evening. The structure of this evening's program is quite straightforward. First, I will outline the main structure and topics of Parliament Unexpected. I will try to be as succinct as I can. My intention for such an overview or outline of the book is simply to take us quickly through the main points of Parliament Unexpected so that those of us who have not yet read the book are on the same page as those who have. More importantly, my overview is aimed at paving the way for Tan Sri to address us with his remarks. From the very brief discussion I had with Tan Sri, I understand that he will expand on some of the more important issues covered in his book. Tan Sri will also give further remarks on where he thinks we are headed and how we can proceed from where we are at this point in time. Following Tan Sri's address, I will invite YB Sim to give his remarks as discussant. YB Sim will then talk a little bit about parliamentary reform, and he will then share his thoughts about Tan Sri Ariff, whom he knows personally. Finally, we will open the floor to those in the audience who have questions they would like to ask Tan Sri or YB Sim. Perhaps some questions might have been triggered during your reading of the book or during Tan Sri's and YB Sim's remarks to us tonight. The opportunity is also available for those on Facebook or YouTube to send to us your comments. YB Sim, perhaps you also might have some questions for Tan Sri that you might want to ask. Of course, you both have direct communications with each other, but there might be a question or two that you feel we could all benefit from if Tan Sri address your question in public this evening. Because we only have until 10 p.m., please make sure, those in the audience, please make sure that you have your questions ready by the time we come to the Q&A session. Please state your name. I will say this again later on, but please state your name, where you're from, state your question succinctly, and state to whom your question is for, whether it's for Tan Sri or to YB or to both. For those on Facebook or YouTube writing in your questions, please send them to us as soon as possible before the Q&A session. Many of us have seen how Tan Sri turns off the microphone in the Dewan Rakyat whenever our MPs exceed or abuse their time, the time that they have to speak in the Dewan Rakyat. Tonight, I will act as speaker, and I will turn off your microphones after you exceed the 3-minute mark. Okay, so for the outline of Parliament Unexpected. Parliament Unexpected is the whirlwind ride experienced by Tan Sri Ariff as Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat from 2018, when he was elected by Pakatan Harapan members of Parliament, until he was replaced by the government of Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin on 13 July 2020. The book consists of 4 parts. Part 1 marks out aspects of Tan Sri's political and professional career, which I very briefly outlined a few minutes ago. In part 2, Tan Sri introduces us to the men and women in and outside Parliament with whom he worked during his stint as Speaker. He then discusses the sources of the rules and principles that theoretically govern the Federal Legislative Assembly, such as the constitutional provisions on the powers and functions of Parliament and its officers, the Houses of Parliament Act 1952, and the standing orders. He also discusses some of the rules and principles that structure the procedures, processes, and order of business of the Dewan Rakyat. In addition to the formal and official rules of Parliament, Tan Sri discusses in part 2 about some of the other unofficial or unwritten rules, norms, values, practices, and dynamics that make up the distinct political culture of our young Bahomats in the Dewan Rakyat. It is this political culture that determines what official rules and regulations are followed or ignored. For example, as Tan Sri writes in his book, points of order are often used by MPs to introduce disorder to the proceedings. Tan Sri also writes, and we have all seen or heard the low levels to which some young Bahomats descend when debating in Dewan Rakyat. In part 3, Tan Sri presents us with his vision for political and institutional change. He writes about his and his colleagues' efforts at parliamentary reform to restore the dignity and constitutional position of Parliament, given its decline over the past few decades into a mere rubber stamp of the executive. These efforts include efforts to improve the system of parliamentary committees, to improve on the effectiveness and efficiency of question time, to merakyatkan Parliament, a program of events aimed at opening up Parliament to the people, and to provide a comprehensive and detailed work of reference for the general reader, for the ordinary Malaysian, on parliamentary procedures in Malaysia. The outcome of this last effort is this book, Law, Principles, and Practice in the Dewan Rakyat. In the last part, in part 4, that Tan Sri titles The Political Storm, Tan Sri writes of the notable increase in communal and narrow politics in the Dewan Rakyat. He also touches on the growing tensions in Pakatan over the question of whether and when Dr. Mahathir would hand over the reins to Anwar Ibrahim. There was also the increasing pressure on certain politicians faced with corruption and other charges. These and other developments set the stage for the Sheraton move of February 2020, the end of the Pakatan federal government, and of Tan Sri's term as Speaker. Let me digress just a little bit into some details. For just a minute or two, let me briefly highlight one very critical moment in part 4. It's a moment when the spotlight of history was on Tan Sri, and he was faced with a very momentous question and dilemma of significance and consequence for us all. After the Sheraton move, the interim Prime Minister, Mahathir, called for a special sitting of Parliament on the 2nd of March 2020. That sitting would have taken place while the young Di Pertuan Agong was meeting with parliamentary leaders and individual MPs to decide on who had the confidence of the majority to form and lead the next government as Prime Minister after Pakatan. Tan Sri could have decided to convene that meeting, and perhaps the course of history would have been different. But as we all know, Tan Sri declined Mahathir's request for that special sitting, and the rest is history, as we know it. Anyway, yeah, that was a bit of a digress into some detail. Let me wrap up my outlines of the book. In the remaining chapters, Tan Sri narrates the developments following the fall of the Pakatan government, the formation of Tan Sri Muhyiddin's administration, and subsequently the formation of the government under Prime Minister Ismail Sabri. Tan Sri also talks of the efforts of Parliament to attempt some semblance of continuity amidst the disruptions caused by COVID-19 and the state of national emergency that lasted from January to August of 2021. Tan Sri, I hope I have not committed any injustices in my outline of the book that you co-authored with Lutfi. If I have, please feel free to point out any mistakes or omissions on my part that I have made that affect the message you might want to convey to us tonight. With that, I call upon Tan Sri to take the floor.
Okay. First of all, as is obligatory on the part of someone who's invited to such a function, I must thank the organizers, obviously, Penang Institute, Dr. Wee, of course, Fawaz, and Stephen Sim, for kindly accepting the invitation to be here as discussant, it says. Now, this is my first physical event, actually. So I'm very pleased to be here in this physical event. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had another event with the British Graduates Association that was attended by some 400 persons, but it was all virtual. I couldn't see them at all. But we had an interesting discussion on so many issues. But here, of course, we have many here. I think we have close to 60, which is a nice figure to have for this evening. This is my first visit to Penang Institute too. I must congratulate the Penang Institute for having such a splendid building, which has all the aura of a place for academic and practical discourses on many things that affect the country. So fingers pointed to Sim. You must have been instrumental in getting this place moving in Chintong, I think. The stalwarts of DAP. So I wish to congratulate the Penang Institute for taking this initiative. When I entered this building, it almost reminded me of some European institution, you know, and the ambience, the atmosphere of learning, not only European, but antipodean institution. Like when I went to Canberra, they have an institute there, Institute of Asia Pacific Affairs. It's just like this. You know, you can't go wrong in the layout and the aura and the ambience. So in short, I'm very pleased to be here. Now, could I possibly start by telling the audience why I wrote this book? In my discussion with Fawaz, we thought it might be good if I start the discussion by saying why I wrote this book. From what I know, very few speakers in Malaysia have written books. You know, there have been some, but they tend to be more autobiographical, listing out all the achievements of the speakers and so on. And there's also one done by the current speaker, the current minister in charge of Parliament. That's a historical account of Parliament. So the only book on the Malaysian Parliament was published in 1969. When I had just graduated from university, I was teaching constitutional law. And that was one of the books I picked up to study what the Malaysian Parliament was about. But again, this book is a very slim volume, not terribly academic, but it tells you what you needed to know about the structure, right down to the pay scale of MPs and so on. Useful to an extent, but not very useful. So I thought, since I have been appointed as a speaker, one of the things I wanted to do was to have something published, to pull the collective wisdom of Parliament into a book of reference. And that, of course, led to this book, Law, Principles and Practices in the Dewan Rakyat of Malaysia. At last count, I think we only have about 4 copies left. But I've taken 2 copies for Fawaz and Penang Institute, so there are only 2 copies left, unless the publisher will want to print more copies later. So I was really intent on writing this book. I couldn't have written it alone because it's a big book. So I needed the assistance of a lot of people. So I wrote, if I can take credit, maybe 1/3 of the book is mine. The rest are the product of academic persons as well as parliamentary officers. That's more important. The parliamentary officers. So we did this in a very short space of time, less than 2 years from inception. And I made sure that it would be published before I got booted out. So I managed to do it. And I'm very happy to say, this is my contribution to the Parliament of Malaysia. All said and done, here in this compendium, you will find many of the answers, if not the answers, the pointers to some of the issues that are plaguing the parliamentary system. And there is a chapter towards the end which talks about the Sheraton move and the effects of the Sheraton move on the constitutional structure of Malaysia. And when the book was launched, I remember one of the members of the audience said, I found the last chapter riveting. Because then, remember this was published in July. It was the date when I was booted out then. 13th of July, unlucky 13. So it was still very much a matter under heated discussion. What was Sheraton move? Who's at fault? Who's not at fault? And the entire atmosphere was evolving, and it was quite unfortunate. So I said I'd better write down what I knew about the Sheraton move from my perspective, to set the record straight from my perspective. And many found that chapter, as I said, riveting. It's not a very legal chapter, but I ended by saying, thankfully, the constitutional system is strong enough to withstand this kind of assault on the principles or the basic principles of the Constitution. I mentioned it. And then it struck me that perhaps I should then write another book. This is heavy going, I wouldn't recommend it to my friends. Heavy going, because it's meant to be heavy going. I said, why don't I write another book? Also upon the instigation of my friends, and of course Lutfi kept bugging me and said, you better preserve some of your notes. Maybe you should write something after your removal or your retirement, as the case may be. So I thought it might be a good idea. But I made clear to my friends, I'm not going to write a memoir. So I'm not going to be another Tommy Thomas. I'm not going to write another memoir. I mentioned that because people thought I wrote this book because others were already writing, their memoirs or recollections. No, that is not the case. It arises from this big book, and then in between, the Speaker of the House of Commons, Bako, wrote his book, which is a sort of memoir too. I found the book very interesting. So at the back of my mind, I said, nah, we'll do something like this. Not so much a treatment which is too legalistic, but a book that tells the reader the parliamentary story. Okay? And in the course of doing that, of course, I had to include a little bit of my personal history, because then you wouldn't know where I was coming from or going to. So, but that segment, which perhaps you can call the memoir, comes in about 2 pages. That's it. You know? I wanted to put things on record because I'm a Sungai Petani boy. Yeah? So I wanted to put it on record. You know, I come from humble beginnings, blah, blah, blah. And that's it. That's the extent of my memoir. But there was a reviewer last week who wrote and said, no, he should have told us a lot more about his own life. But I started on the premise that no one is going to be so interested to know, what makes me what I am or what I'm not. And that's not important to me. What is important, I thought, in writing this book, is to tell the parliamentary story during my time in the simplest way possible. Yeah? And lo and behold, I found it quite easy to write because it was still fresh in my mind. This was very difficult. It was actually a torture to write. It was very difficult to write. But this particular book was relatively easier to write because I was writing more for the general audience, for them to know what went on during my time. But of course, against a certain bigger agenda that I had personally. I wanted the country, the Malaysian citizens who are concerned about developments, to know the direction in which we were moving and why we were moving in that direction. And finally, what we could do among ourselves to arrest this kind of toxicity so that the country is placed on a more even keel. It is not impossible. I write this not out of dismay. Yeah? I write this with expectation of hope for change, which I think we can achieve. We can achieve. Of course, provided. There's so many, proviso, as the lawyers say it. Yeah? But I think in the closing chapter, I wanted all these points to be raised so that Malaysians can think about these issues and reflect, and together we can do something about it. Yeah? And not leave it entirely to the politicians. Right? This is a danger that we are still seeing, but maybe we'll get to that later. And YB Sim is here. He can also tell us his immediate view of what is wrong in Parliament and so on and so forth. But let me say this as well. I wrote from my personal experience, from my perspective as Speaker of Parliament. I wrote about the Sheraton move as an outsider, but even that is not quite true because I was thrust into, the immediate moment. I had to decide, as I said in the book. There were many difficult questions that I had to decide. And hence, you see the painting of by Tony Pua included in the inner cover for a reason. I had to ask Tony Pua about that. He said, "Oh, can publish it." Tony Pua had me portrayed as someone in full regalia, speaker, in the middle, trying to speak. And so I asked him, why am I portrayed? I'm no part of a Sheraton move. I wasn't involved directly. But he said, hey, look, you are speaking. No one is listening to you. Those who were involved were all at the bottom doing their little things. If you look closely at the painting, it's very telling. But I, as speaker, was in a sense quite powerless to do anything, although I saw the chess being played. Yeah? But of course, as you mentioned, when Dr. Mahathir, as the interim speaker then, asked me to decide based on the procedural rule Standing Order 11.3, to call for a special sitting of Parliament, I refused. All right? I wanted to avert a constitutional crisis. That was the prime point that I had in mind. Because to me, it's not right. How can you summon Parliament to meet when the Agong, the Conference of Rulers, was also involved, had yet to decide who commanded the support of the majority of members of the Dewan Rakyat? So I refused on a technical ground, no doubt, because actually there was nothing there to discuss a matter of national concern. What national concern? I didn't have any motion given to me to consider, to call for the special sitting, nothing. And of course, there are other points that I could have included, but I can't because of confidentiality issues and so on and so forth. But because of that, I got roundly condemned by quite a few, including Tommy Thomas. He says it was wrong. I should have known better. I should have acceded to the request by Mahathir to hold a special meeting. Yeah? Who knows what could have happened? Who knows? Parliament could have voted for Mr. X or Mr. Y, or none of the two. Who knows? But the point is, I thought I had to avert a constitutional crisis. Imagine pitting the palace against an interim prime minister, not a full prime minister, mind, interim prime minister, who's supposed to be what? Caretaker prime minister. All right? So that is the general setting, and I had to put that right so that people will understand. Because I had my supporters too. I entered the building for one event just the day after, I think. And I was struck by the standing ovation that I got. I think, what is this for? Right? I can't remember, what was that function? That function was one of the talks that we gave in the Speaker's Lecture series. And then my aide told me, you know why? That's because you refused Mahathir's request to hold a special assembly. Everyone wanted to know why, including the foreign press. It hadn't been done before. People thought the Speaker had to be powerless, had to bend to the wishes of the executive. But I said, no, I will not do it. I've got to be truthful to the Constitution. I swear to abide by and protect the Constitution, just like MPs do. Swear to do the same. And therefore, when it comes to the crunch, if the Constitution becomes an issue at stake, of course, to me at least, I had to respect the Constitution and not the Prime Minister. Right? And of course, later on, when I had discussions, a small talk with Mahathir, I don't think he minded. He made a comment in one of the speeches, I think, or well, maybe even in Parliament. They said, this is a speaker, he wanted to be independent. You don't remove him. Yeah, so he understood why I did it. Yeah? But this particular episode has been talked about, and there are lots of theories on it, depending on who you talk to. I speak to the DAP fellas, and they'll say there's a certain angle to it. I speak to the PKR guys. No, not all of them have a uniform view of it. Some have a particular take on it, on actually what he wanted to do, and whatever it is. But I have no immediate knowledge of what's going on in their minds or what went on in their minds. But to me, that was the reason, to protect the Constitution, to make sure that the principles of the Constitution are followed and to avoid a constitutional crisis. We had too many already, so one more would have possibly plummeted us further into the political abyss. So I wrote the book. And I wrote it, as I said, in the simplest of terms possible, with the assistance of Lutfi, who is quite well versed in communications, so he has been of great assistance to me. and the editors too. We had one editor and of course the publisher, Amira, also a sister. Yeah. And they did a splendid job. I must thank everyone because it took me about 7 months to finish the book. And it took about 1 month, I think, for the entire process to be completed, right down to the printing of the book. So I thank profusely the publisher. And of course, it's a little book, not very thick, but I would like the reader to go through it with a sense that something is quite wrong with our parliament. What is wrong with our parliament? And I have tried to supply some of the answers by anecdotal referencing. And so I find in the book copious references to the handset. I had to make the point very clear. Pointless talking like an academician, and doing your construct, the academic construct and sub-construct, whatever. No one will understand it ultimately because if I'm addressing it to the common man. But if I lead them to the handset, read through what politicians have to say on several points, sometimes you get very agitated, Yeah. And a lot of people who have read the book, they feel very agitated and then also very sad towards the end. Why is this happening? What kind of people are we having in parliament? Right? So I had to portray this, no holds barred. Yeah? The toxicity involved in the ICERT episode, the Rome Statute episode, my election as speaker, completely unnecessary. They had to make a song and dance on it. So these are covered in the chapters. I would recommend that chapter particularly. It's hilarious. It's serious, but it's also hilarious. I was the only candidate to be elected. They objected because according to them, Dr. Mahathir had not given the requisite number of days, the 7 days notice requirement. So what? Because under the standing orders, it does not invalidate the proceedings. But if you look at the sequence of events, I mentioned in the book, it was actually 7 days. I actually traced when I went to see Mahathir, when he asked me, we want to appoint you as speaker, would you accept it? That sort of thing. I think it was 7 days, quite clearly. But no, they had to make a scene out of it. So everyone left. So it makes a very interesting reading when you look at the handset. All kinds of trickery was involved. So they left, except for, 2, Hanifah Aman and Khairi Jamaluddin. Yeah? They were the only 2 opposition members who stood their ground. And the rest left. But then suddenly they realized they had to be sworn in. And the only person who could swear them in is the speaker. So they crawl back. They crawl back. It was hilarious. But subsequently, a few of them, not all, a few of them say, actually, don't take it too hard. We don't mean it, and so on and so forth. But the point I want to make in the book, and the point I want to make now, and even beyond, we do not have the parliamentary culture that we want. Yeah? There is still a lot of nonsense being played out until today. Yeah? And we must do something about it. But I will not be, so, unkind as to portray our MPs as a bunch of monkeys. No, I would, because as I said, I'm writing this book with hope. Yeah? And I have great respect for a lot of MPs. I have a great deal of respect for a lot of MPs too. Yeah? But there are a sizable portion, enough for one to still have hope that these people can change the environment. Sim, of course, is one. And that's why he's here. He wrote a book of poetry. And they came to me and said, can we have a launching? And I said, fine, we'll do it. Because Parliament is not about dirty politics. Parliament is also about literature. Parliament is also about civilized behavior and civilized discourses. These were the things I wanted to do. So he came and I think no one complained. I'm no fellows didn't say, well, yeah, if you have a DAP guy launching his DAP book, no. Not that they would attend. I don't think they attended. But many attended, and they were interested to see this being continued. And this is the merakyatkan Parliament idea that I want to introduce. So, going on to the last chapter, because I don't want to bore you with too much detail, that can come during question time later on. To me, in writing the book, the last chapter is also very important. Lofi and I and the editor spent a lot of time thinking, what shall we call the last chapter? Yeah, shall we call it an epilogue? The editor said, no, you cannot call it an epilogue because the story has not ended. Yeah? So we thought about it, and I suggested to them, all right, we can't even call it a closing chapter because the chapter is not closed. Still a lot of nonsense that needs curing, needs to be discussed. Yeah? Story is not at an end. So why don't we just say in closing? Yeah, for the book in closing, but with a lot of discussion that we can continue later on. And in the in closing chapter, I have mentioned the absence of integrity, the absence of competence, the absence of statesmanship among our leaders. Yeah? I've also mentioned about how the speaker and deputy speakers have a number of times played around with the rules. I've cited the Sungai Kim affair to make sure that people realize that the speaker has got some say. The speaker can even suspend the standing orders if he wants to. But he does not want to, he can take the easy way out. I am just the speaker. The prime minister is more powerful than I am. The prime minister says, call a meeting, I call a meeting. I've got no discretion. I want to call that out. The speaker has a discretion. The reason why I was booted out, among other things, is because I think they were afraid of that discussion that I had and would have exercised. I think that's one of the reasons. Yeah, they wanted something or someone who's more government friendly, despite my best efforts to convince them that I am actually not partial to any particular political party. Yeah, I'm impartial. I've acted impartially. Although I come from Amanah, I gave up all my positions in Amanah, from top to bottom. Although I retained my membership, but no party positions. Didn't attend Amanah functions and so on and so forth. So I wanted to be independent, but they were not comfortable with it. Partly because the parliamentary culture has always been, speaker is always for us. So that's convenient parliamentary culture. But I wanted to change all that. I think we have to change all that, so that parliament becomes an important institution. I speak of not only parliament being a rubber stamp, but I speak of the dangers of letting things lie so that people lose trust in parliament. So it doesn't become merely a rubber stamp, it becomes a betrayer of the people's trust, which is where we are, I think, now. We are also reaching a low point, but the low point gets even lower each time. And a lot of members of the electorate are beginning not to feel interested in politics. Yeah? I see it even in my Cawangan. I see it in some of the members down the line, grassroots, who say, what can I do? What can we do? We voted Pakatan Harapan in, look what happened. Yeah? It's Pakatan fault. Oh, what can we do? We're powerless. All kinds of arguments been coming in. And that's the reason why in Malacca, in Johor Bahru, I think, I might be wrong, we had such a low turnout. How much was it in Johor? 40 something, eh? Is it? Johor, the turnout, very low. Yeah. That element too. Yeah. But even you take that as an adjustment, the turnout was abysmal compared to the 80%. Even if you take that factor into account, your 80% as again I say was 56%. 80% and 56%. That's awful. So a lot would prefer not to vote, not to attend. What's the point? My message in the book is no. We must attend. We must make sure that we feel concerned enough to attend and to vote whoever merits or deserves our trust as citizens. Otherwise, there's no answer to the things that we're seeing now. It's actually very troubling. It's there in the book, about the sequence of events. I am the unfortunate speaker, in a way. Maybe the current speaker is even more unfortunate than I am, because I'm unfortunate because of the movements. Never before in Malaysian history, in political history, have we seen such dramatic changes leading to a fall in the federal government through the treachery, depending on where you come from. Some people call it heroic, but to me it's treachery. When a government duly elected by the electorate gets defeated through a backdoor movement, constitutionally proper on its surface, but if I've also said in the book, constitutionality depends not merely on legalities. It also depends on more basic things. Political processes is at the heart of constitutional law too. So it's there. Don't forget about the legalistic argument. Be in a position of using logic. When the electorate vote PH in, how can it be right for PH to be defeated by this frogging? And we are seeing it until today. So I asked Stephen, what's happening now with the anti-frogging legislation? I'm not so comfortable as yet until I see it, the actual bill, in the form it takes. Then we'll see what happens. We still see people saying nonsensical things. Oh, it's usual for party frogging to happen. It's been happening even during the Tengku Brahman days. So, what are you saying? It was all right? It was all right there, the Sheraton move, to have the government fall, and with the government falling, to usher in all this kind of problems that we are having until today? People forget also. That's why I also mentioned in the book, but I'm no economist. To take people like Dr. Wee and all that to analyze this further, and then economics amongst you. There is always an economic dimension to a political problem, to a legal problem. There's no such thing as just a legal issue. There is an economic dimension, and maybe our leaders don't see it. That's why they're still talking a lot of nonsense. We need to have stability, not because we want UMNO as a stable government, no, or Pakatan, whatever. We need stability because that is good for the economy, for the bread and butter issues to be resolved. So I think as citizens, we must tell those people, it's the economy that you should be concerned about. The little things that you should be concerned about, not big power politics, not big power conglomerates problems. You understand what I mean? You see it. And to me, just to take one example, As a former member of the Securities Commission, in fact, I was the first director of the Market Supervision Division in SC. To see what is happening today, I say, it is saddening. We created the SC from zero to make sure that it had the integrity, right? To make sure that anyone who manipulates the market, who lies to the market, will get their just deserts. But no, what's happening today? Attorney General has issued a statement. This is something actually out of the ordinary too. We have allowed the offenders to be compounded because it is in the public interest to do so. What logic is this? To me, as an old hack and an SC, if someone manipulates the market, if someone lies in the prospectus, that is a grave crime. Because markets have to be transparent. Markets have to be fair. Markets have to be equitable. Right? That's economics. Same thing in politics. Same thing in Parliament. We must make sure that we achieve that level of transparency across the board, and that rights respect for rights and for justice and rule of law and all that are preconditions for development. Right? I think there's going to be some series of lectures on economic issues in Penang in June, I think, organized by MIER. I listened in to their first few lectures by Dr. Kamal Saleh and all that, and I suddenly realized, there is a connect. The connection between the stuff I'm talking about in the book and the real economics. There is a distinct connect between the two. And we must make our leaders and MPs realize that this is so. And of course, in the book, I've spent a lot of time discussing the committee system. That's also key to establishing a good parliamentary system. So let me just conclude my introductory kind of analysis of the book by saying there are lots of things in the book, slim as it may be, and I would advise you to if you can get hold of a copy, read it, and give me your comments. Let's think through this together. And of course, tonight, if you have questions for us, I will try to answer. But there are, of course, also issues that I cannot disclose, because they are told to me in confidence, particularly issues involving executive palace and cabinet and all that, or what someone told me, that sort of thing. I am reluctant to disclose everything because I'm sworn to some level of confidence. It would make some really racy or gossipy account if I do so, but I think it's not fair. Not fair. For certain things said in confidence to me to be disclosed in public. So we can take it from here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for your address. Just as a maybe small advertisement for the book, I forgot to say that we have, Tan Sri and his son and family have brought a number of copies, and those who are interested in purchasing them they can buy them at a discount. Tan Sri, I haven't said how much of the discount. But please do get your copies. One of the things that I wanted to say also is, if you look at the book, it's, the font, the cover, the picture of Tan Sri almost like a deer caught in headlights. You know, it seems to give a impression of a very easy book to read, and in fact, it is an easy book. It's almost like Tan Sri talking to you, reading, and his voice as he speaks to you. And he says in the introduction that it can be finished within one day. The avid reader can finish it in one day. It took me a few days, 3 days. But the thing I noticed is the time that the contents of the book occupied my mind was more than the 3 days it took to read it. It's deceptively simple, deceptively easy to read, but really the things that he and Lutfi wrote in the book are quite heavy in terms of the significance for Malaysia. I just wanted to say that. Anyway, again, thank you very much, Tan Sri. Let me go straight to inviting YB Sim to take the floor to give his remarks as discussant. YB.
Thank you, Fawaz. Tan Sri, welcome to Penang and the Penang Institute together with Puan Sri. If any one of you is still not convinced that Parliament is a complex and complicated affair, I mean, look at this. We call this the Malaysian Erskine May, and this is the handiwork of Tan Sri Ariff. I think he deserves a round of applause for this. I remember Tan Sri when I was first elected in 2013. One of the books that I read, there were two very important books to me at that time. Number one was the Erskine May, so I have to devour. And being a very poor, newly elected MP, young MP at that time, I didn't have the money to buy the actual Erskine May. So I did what any good college student would lah. ... Leave that to your imagination. And it was very interesting to look at the profound culture, procedures developed almost over 1,000 years. So if there's any consolation, I think our parliament is very young, 60 years at most. And whatever we see and whatever we admire with parliament, especially the Westminster, we must realize that it didn't happen overnight. There were bloodshed, in fact, if we talk about the Westminster. The second book was Lim Kit Siang's Time Bomb. And that was my first time reading it in 2013. Imagine that I joined the DAP in 2007. Very first time reading Time Bomb was in 2013 after I became an MP, and I realized, because Time Bomb was essentially a collection of Kit Siang's parliamentary speeches in the 60s, in the 70s. Then I realized that, a lot of issues still have not changed. You just change the names of the actors, change the numbers, and you get whatever that happened in the 70s, we are still facing it today. I also told Tan Sri when he sat down that this is the first time I've heard him spoke so much. Because, I mean, like it or not, I used to wonder why the chairman of the Dewan Rakyat, or the Commons for that matter, is called the Speaker. Because essentially, the Speaker actually speaks the least. He was supposed to be he control the proceeding, in fact, even adjudicate on the behaviors of MPs. I know, no easy task, an unenviable task. I mean, essentially, he is the moderator, not really the speaker, right? Which is why I was enjoying myself listening to him off the cuff. This is the longest I've ever heard Tan Sri Ariff. So why was it called a speaker? And then, through my long, maybe not long, from 2013 reading of parliamentary history, I realized that when history first gave us a Speaker of Parliament, almost 1,000 years ago in the person of Peter de la Mole in the UK Parliament. He was actually appointed to convey the message of the Commons to the Lords and the Crown, the monarch, right? He was supposed to be representing the Commons after they have discussed and deliberated, and then bring that discussion, summarize it to the king. In other words, he was the spokesman, and hence the speaker. So you get that that term there, and that what that means is this: the speaker represents the house, which in turn is supposed to represent the people, to speak to the government. That was the first evolution of the task, and it is not an easy thing because you are basically speaking to those who are in power. In fact, the first speaker, Peter de la Mole, that was essentially what he did. He went to the king, after deliberation in the Commons, he went to the king, called out and called for the removal of three very important persons in the government. Number one, the Prime Minister. Number two, the Finance Minister. And number three, the mistress of the king. Three very important persons. The third one is the one who bought the Birkin bags. So that was not an easy task, right? That was not an easy task. And no wonder speakers of the English Parliament, we know some of them were beheaded in history. Fortunately, the situation is much safer here in Malaysia, or not. Because, and Tan Sri used this word a lot in his book, rubber stamp. When the speaker and parliament is aligned to those who yield the power of the guillotine, then their seats and their heads are safe. But not so much with Tan Sri Ariff. Yeah. He called in fact, a number of times in the book, I've read the book more than a day, probably took me a week because of my schedule. A number of times he called out the parliament as being rubber stamp. And we are often told, I mean, this is really the kind of culture that we are in this country. We are often told that our society, the Asian community, we prefer stability and loyalty to the rebellious chaos of democracy, right? In fact, our ancestors were often invoked to say that, we have to be loyal, we have to be obedient to those in power, to the government. Tan Sri, I'm a student of Malay literature. I mean, my first degree was computer engineering. I published a poetry book. And how I wish you're still the speaker now so that I can launch my second book on Hikayat Hang Tuah in the lobbies of Parliament. But I can say with confidence that this is not the case. In fact, I want to share here today what I call the Hansard of the Parliament of Kesultanan Melayu Melaka. I'm going to cite one passage from the Hikayat Hang Tuah to show that it is not true that our ancestor, or even the Malay ancestor, preferred blind loyalty and obedience, preferred the parliament, so to speak, to be just merely a rubber stamp. And this is a passage on this quote. Is of course, the original language is in Bahasa, but I'm quoting the translation of Sastrawan Negara, Professor Muhammad Haji Saleh. I call this the ancient Hansard of the Malaccan Parliament. Right? And here it goes. If the king wished to execute someone, and Hang Tuah thought that he should not die, then he will live. If the king wanted to capture a criminal, and Hang Tuah, if he did not arrest him, he was not captured. If there was a deliberation in quote unquote, no, this is mine, in the Parliament, and Hang Tuah had not spoken, then the issue remained unsolved, unresolved. Sounds like Hang Tuah was a Speaker of Parliament. But what I want to show is this. It was clear that even in our culture, even in our history, even in our civilization, there was space for disagreement with the power that be. Hang Tuah dared to defy the Sultan's view and opinion. And from the passage, it was clear that at times, the Sultan himself changed his mind, according to the counsel of his MPs. And reading this book, Parliament Unexpected, I think one reads of how Tan Sri Ariff was really single-minded in his pursuit of parliamentary reforms, including refusing to be a rubber stamp speaker. From my own personal experience with Tan Sri Ariff and in his house, there were many times actually, I have not told him this, I personally actually hope Tan Sri had taken a tougher stand, especially against the opposition MPs. Just like how Pandika Amin Mulia used to do it on us, right? I was evicted before by Tan Sri Pandika. Sometimes when I was in the house, I look at the commotion and I wish in my heart personally, Tan Sri would have taken a tougher stand, evict some of them, do something more drastic. But looking back and reading through, I realized that Speaker Ariff was different. He was different. In fact, in the book, Fawaz and Tan Sri himself talk about how he, at one point, early into his speakership, I actually thought maybe because he was a judge, so he's not used to being a speaker. It's a very political. It may not be a partisan position, but it's a very political position. So maybe being a judge, it's not easy for him to control a bunch of politicians. But then I realized, looking back, reflecting, and also reading the book, understanding more of where his heart is, I realized that he is definitely different. I mean, he dared to defy Tun Dr. Mahathir when Tun, on the 27th of February, it's just the Thursday after Sheraton. Sheraton was on Sunday, right, 23rd of February. So on the Thursday, and that was the peak of Sheraton move. Everyone was discussing, trying to regroup and then regroup again, and then so. And on the 27th, Mahathir wrote Tan Sri a letter asking for the convening of Parliament on the 2nd of March, which is the Monday after that. And of course, as was told by both Tan Sri and Fawaz, he rejected Mahathir. I mean, I'm not sure how history would turn out, right? If Tan Sri have allowed the sitting to go on the 2nd of March on that Monday, will Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin still swear in as PM on the 1st of March, on that Sunday? I don't know, it's moot point now. But we know that because of that defiance, whether directly or indirectly, Tan Sri Ariff actually lost his seat or his chair afterward when the government changed. I'm not sure how things would be different, whether you'll still be speaker and I'll still be a deputy minister, and we will not be here launching this book. I'm not sure. Yeah? But one thing that is sure, one thing that is certain, Tan Sri Ariff is no rubber stamp speaker. It wasn't easy. As I read the book, I read both the consciential and intellectual struggle that he have. He was, really the book reads like he's talking to us. But at the same time, I think it was also a very self-introspective book. He was struggling inside of him, trying to rationalize some of these action that he has taken, trying to rationalize some of the reform that he has done, the decision that he has made. And I find also very interesting that this is really not a memoir. This is really not a memoir because there's a lot of abnegation, if you like. There's a lot of self-withdrawal. You don't see very much of Ariff in there as compared to his ideas, his thoughts, and his observation of the struggle for parliamentary reform. And perhaps this is what also made Speaker Ariff very interesting and very, very different. Of course, the other incident where you see a very defiant Speaker Ariff was the Kim incident, where all the time, being opposition MP in the past and now, we try to raise emergency motions on pressing public issues, but most of the time you don't get it. Under Ariff, I don't think he even discussed with Yeo Bying or the ministers who were in charge at that time. He allowed an emergency motion within, I think, less than 24 hours for Sungai Kim to be debated in Parliament, and the motion was raised, interestingly, not by a member of the opposition, but by a member of then government, a backbencher, Pasir Gudang, if I'm not mistaken, right? Pasir Gudang. So that was something very different. And so looking back, from the early thought of Tan Sri Ariff as somebody who was unable to exert his authority, we come to see Tan Sri Ariff as somebody who actually asserted his authority, but not in a way that politicians like, right? And perhaps he's right. Perhaps that's the reason why he was not continued as Speaker after the fall of the Pakatan Harapan government. There was a very short narrative about the event leading up to his what do you call it? His stepping down, or his vacanting the seat of the Speaker. And there was a conversation with several actors like Tan Sri Mahidin, with Asmin, and with Taqiyuddin. So I think it's interesting. You should read it for yourself. But one thing to note is that Mahathir did not, put it against him for rejecting that letter. Definitely, I think, definitely from the book at least, because after the Lanka Sheraton incident, when he was supposed to be removed, Mahathir actually put in a motion to restore, or rather to keep Tan Sri Ariff as Speaker even in the new administration. So I think he did not hold it against Tan Sri Ariff. I think we have to put that on record. In the book, Tan Sri also wrote about, all of us like to complain how our parliament is very uncivilized. There's a lot of sneering and jeering, and don't get me wrong, I totally disagree with that. And I think if those of you who followed my parliamentary speeches, I don't do that. And actually, a lot of us don't do that. You get that from a group of them, but somehow that tainted the whole bunch of us. But I think Tan Sri, writing in that book, also noted that as he traveled to the different parliamentary houses around the world, he realized that the boisterousity is actually a mark of modern parliamentary democracy. He talked about sitting in the Australian Senate and listening to parliamentarians jeering and sneering at one another. I'm not sure whether in that Malaysian fashion, in a good old Malaysian fashion or not, but basically you see that chaos, chaotic behavior in the different parliaments outside Malaysia. I always like to think that, of course, our people love stability. And when Tan Sri said there's economic consideration involved in the Lanka Sheraton, I think it's not difficult to imagine. There's economic consideration involved in Lanka Sheraton. But all of us love stability. But I think personally, democracy is actually a noisy, chaotic affair. We are not living in North Korea, right? So we cannot expect quiet compliance most of the time. But chaos does not mean we cannot have civility. Doesn't mean we cannot have civility. And I definitely think we can. Disagreement with each other in parliament need not be abusive. It need not be highly offensive. And which is why I feel that while we want to safeguard the impunity of MPs in terms of free speech in parliament, the Committee of Right and Privileges must be put to real use against unparliamentary speeches and misleading or even outright lies in parliament. I do not recall any MPs in the past, I know, since I was elected in 2013, any MPs being referred to the Committee of Rights and Privileges since my election, despite the numerous invocation of the standing order, in particular 3612. I myself have personally, for example, charged 3612 against Dr. Sri Najib Razak when he was a finance minister, tabling the 2018 budget, right? That was 2018, and more recently against Transport Minister Wee Ka Siong and Communication and Multimedia Minister Anwar Musa for their conflicting statements, conflicting parliamentary answers in regards to Project Apricot, the underwater sea cable. I've never seen 3612 used against anyone, despite the numerous, in fact, I think a very recent one is also Tony Pua against Najib. It seems to us that Standing Order 3612 is like a blunt tool. It's a very nice tool in the parliamentary toolbox, but only put there for the sake of being there. No one has ever used it to the real effect of what it meant to be. I mean, 3612 basically says that if anyone has committed or misled the House, he or she can be referred to the Committee of Right and Privileges, and then the Committee of Right and Privileges can investigate on that person, because the principle is that Parliament adjudicate on its own behavior. But I've never seen it being used. The other thing is, ministers should not be given so much power that they have the ability to not answer questions. Right? I'm not even talking about giving false answers. I'm talking about ministers have power under Standing Order 23.4 on the agreement of Speaker. I'm not sure whether any minister invoked that to you at that time, to decline to answer any questions. And I've received, this is declining to answer questions, but I've also received parliamentary answers which orang kata tak menjawab soalan. Sometimes when I post the questions and answer up on the social media, some of the netizens will say, if this person is answering for SPM exam, he'll fail his paper because he has not answered the question. So we have got these issues in Parliament that I think deserve a more permanent and systemic solution. You know, I remember when I was in the ministry, so we have to answer questions, right? The ball is now on our side. So we have to answer questions, we have to respond and react to speeches by the backbenchers. I remember, because ministers and deputies usually have our question drafted by ministry officers. So you have two choices, right? You can either go and read the draft, or you look at the draft and see whether it is relevant. So during my 2 years, most of the time, I have to rewrite the draft. Because I don't want my experience as an opposition MP under the Pandika Amin speakership to repeat itself. The frustration of waiting for your answer after you submit the question. Sometimes you submit 1 month ahead. You wait for the answer, you wait for the parliamentary seating, and then when your day comes, tak jawab soalan or jawab cincai. So I didn't want that to repeat. Usually I will look through the question, look through the answer again, and sit down and redraft some of this response to give the relevant information to the MPs, because I believe that the government owes Parliament not only a response but the truth, because essentially the government owes us accountability. In this regard, I think Tan Sri Ariff should be remembered as a reforming speaker. I mean, I'm not going to bore you with a list of reforms that he have done. I mean, we have talked about it just now. You can read it in the book. But some of these reforms continue to have impact over us today, and I believe for generation to come. Take, for example, the setting up of the PSC, the Parliamentary Select Committees. It was non-existent during my first term as an MP, during Pandika's time. But today we have 10. And 10 also because we signed the MOU. Because Muhyiddin's government actually abolished the 6 that was created during Speaker Ariff's time. And then after the appointment of the new, Prime Minister, we signed an MOU with them. With one of the conditions was to the setting up of several PSCs, and I think almost 4 or 5 of the PSCs were are now chaired by opposition member. So I think these will have long-term impact. We see what Ariff did during his tenureship as planting the seed for. I mean, the reform is an ongoing process for a longer and more sustainable reform agenda in the future. That was planting the seed. And the other thing is, often in the, despite the very chaotic session, because the bad guys are all on the other side, so with the government very well behaved. Despite the chaotic session, Tan Sri Ariff did something very interesting. There is some semblance, there's really what you say, there's sanity to the chaos, because he actually made the Q&A session in the morning more efficient, right? Despite the chaos. I remember in my first term, we were struggling to go to question 5 or 6 by the end of the session every morning. But because of the mechanism put in place by Ariff, I think we actually managed 12, 13, sometimes even 15 questions in a day. So you see that sometimes small, but deep, highly impactful changes that was done during his speakership. I'm also very pleased that the book mentioned my name twice. In good light, right? The first time was his narration of the proceeding when he was elected, right? The first day, he mentioned just now how they left the Dewan and all. And in that book, he cited the Hansard, and I was recorded as calling the opposition member to come back and take their oath. Right, to stay back and take their oath. That was the first citation of my name. And the second time was when he mentioned the launching of my poetry book in Parliament. And this is Tan Sri Ariff's Parliament, right? He not only implemented reforms, but encouraged a great deal of cultural, social, and intellectual activities. There were visits by school students, and I love those visits. I used, as the Deputy Minister for Youth and Sports, I used to engage with them, and at that time we were going about Undi 18, and I always say, I mean, I look at Form 4, Form 5 students getting involved in mock debates in parliamentary compound. I said, you guys are doing much better than the old folks in the house. So no problem Undi 18, because maturity is not tied to biological age, right? And there were lecture series. There were book launches, my book launch, poetry book, and there were book sales. The lobbies of Parliament became a buzz with a lot of activities, book selling activities. The corridor of power for a while was not filled with lobbyists, but book peddlers. I don't know if that's a good thing. Become like a marketplace, Tan Sri, right? That was Tan Sri Ariff's Parliament. But I want to mention one final encounter with a third personal encounter with Tan Sri Ariff, which he did not mention in the book, right? But upon looking back, reflecting, you realize that Tan Sri Ariff has a strange control over Parliament, not in the way that the politician love it, yeah, not in the way that the politician wants it. Once I was very early to Parliament, I'll explain, and I got to catch the prayer, right, the doa before, which they recite at the beginning of the proceeding. Being a member of the administration, the deputy minister, I usually miss the prayer. This is the first item on the agenda every day before anything, before the keluar kacau bodoh, you pray first, right? Pray first. So before that, you pray. But I always miss that because if I come early to Parliament, usually it's to answer and respond to questions, etc. And we will have a pre-council meeting with my ministry staff. So I won't be in Parliament when they are praying, right? I'll be praying somewhere with my ministry staff. We will be talking about the answers and preparing ourselves to respond. So usually I don't get to hear the prayer. But that particular day, I came in and I heard the prayer. And immediately, almost immediately, this kafir realized that there is something wrong with this prayer. One word out of the 150 word prayer was modified, was changed. I'm shocked. I mean, everyone is praying every day. Nobody seems to realize that one word has been changed. So I realized it was changed. I went to see Ariff, and I can show you the word later. I brought the two. It was so long ago. So before I came for the talk, I actually double-checked my standing order. So I have the standing order from 2013, and then I have the new standing order from 2018. I checked. True enough, one word was changed, right? So I went to see Ariff. I talked to him, and he said he's going to come back to me, but because of the unfolding of different events, both of us forgot to come back to each other. But what I want to point out is this, that in a very strange way, at that time, we felt that we lost control of the Dewan Rakyat because we allowed the opposition leader, opposition member to do whatever they want. But in a very strange way, I realized that Tan Sri Ariff was in his very quiet but very strict and very deep method trying to change a lot of things. Not in a way that politician wants it, but in a way that benefits the agenda of parliamentary reform in the long run. I still want to pursue that interesting one-word change because nothing in the standing order can change without the House's approval. So I still want to pursue that, maybe after this. But I want to say that I know many of us are disappointed with politics, parliaments, and politicians, especially after the excitement of the 9th of May 2018. And then in less than 2 years, we quickly, descend into the chaos of even having parliamentary sitting being suspended, and essentially democracy being suspended for more than 6 months in this country. So I think it is understandable that people are dejected. But my dear friends, bear with Parliament. Bear with some of the politicians. There are many good MPs out there who are trying to do the impossible not because we see ourselves as heroes or saviors, but because the option to give up on our country is even more inconceivable. And Tan Sri Ariff, our dear speaker, was one of those MPs. Thank you very much, and I encourage all of you to get hold of that book.
Thank you both to Thank you to both Tan Sri and YB Sim for their address. We started slightly later than scheduled, 10 minutes. But amazingly, I think both our speakers, spoke within the time allotted to them. We're at 9:40. Now it is now we open the floor for questions. As I said earlier this evening, we will take a few questions from the floor, then we will read some of the questions that have been sent in from our Facebook and YouTube viewers. Depending on the time that we have, we will alternate between questions from the audience and questions from our viewers. So I think we'll go with, we'll see how many questions there are. Please state your name, where you're from, state your question succinctly or briefly, and state to whom your question is for, whether it's for Tan Sri or YB. And please keep your question to 3 minutes. Okay. Can I call on? Is it on? Can I call on the gentleman in the black shirt to raise his?
Good evening, Tan Sri, YB. I have one question addressed to Tan Sri. My name is Jeffrey Goh. I'm from Penang, but I live in Jakarta, so Malaysia is a big interest to me. The first question to Tan Sri is basically, I think Tan Sri emphasized there's a sense of hopelessness in the recent by-election in Johor. Will the parliamentary constitution will it be able to have any changes in the way things will be run in Malaysia? That's question number one. Question number two is basically for YB, Stephen. There is a committee of the code and ethics, right? You mentioned just now. Do we know who actually managers are involved or who are involved in the committee? That would be a good indication to us also as a common layman. Thank you.
Shall we take question one by one? Okay, we'll take a few questions and the speakers can address them in one go.
Yes, my name is Sim E. I don't know how to say where I'm from because I'm from both sides of Penang. As an individual, first I like to pay a special tribute to Tan Sri Ariff. I don't know whether he's aware that immediately after he was removed from that speaker's post in the social media, there were various songs depicting Mahathir and Tan Sri Ariff and Theresa Teng's song that he's the best speaker being removed, circulating in the social media as a tribute to special tribute. And then my point that I would like to really talk about, the second point, is that you were mentioning the special sitting that Mahathir requested immediately on the Thursday. Coincidentally, I have first-hand knowledge about Mahathir leaving his post from somebody from Amanah, direct from the time he really left and resigned. So I'm just trying to say that it is a deep regret that if Tan Sri Ariff had been a little bit more aware at that point of time, that you, perhaps myself too, come from the era where manners maketh men. We went through the type of education that we had character to be able to judge with a little bit more correct standards. You were facing a constitutional monarch who was recently changed, and the timing, had you been a little bit really Ariff at that time, our Malaysian history would have a special twist? That is my question. So I just say two things. The first one is special tribute to you, and that we were from a different era, and at that special little, they call it turning point or take-off point or drop-off point. So I just like to record that. Thank you.
Maybe we'll take one more question before we give the floor to the speakers.
Hi, good evening. I got a question for Tan Sri. In your vision to merayakan Parliament and still a member of Amanah, if I'm not mistaken, still a member of Amanah, right? I hope not the first one, but not the last one, to invite Tan Sri to be active back to be in the politics. Because the quality of member of Parliament that you mentioned just now, because unfortunately, they know the rules of the game. They just need to pass. If you use the same SPM, they just need to pass. Instead of 100% voters, maybe about 30 to 40%. And they don't need to be excellent in all the subjects. They know that which constitution they need to win. But the rakyat don't have the choice. As a vision to be a merayakan Parliament, I believe, and the humble opinion, is beyond Parliament. That means giving a rakyat a choice of a good candidate like Tan Sri to run for the coming election, so that, the higher quality member of Parliament can go to the Parliament to merayakan Parliament. Thank you.
We didn't catch your name. Shall we go with the questions? Facebook. Okay, one more from the floor, and then we'll have the speakers speak after that from Facebook or YouTube.
I'm Ahmad. I'm not sure if my question is relevant, but in British parliamentary practice, and I believe in the Malaysian Parliament originally, the Speaker was always one from the MPs. It was changed, I believe, by Mahathir in his first term. So somebody outside can be picked and made a Speaker. I'm not sure who I am addressing this question to, but perhaps both of you may want to give me your thoughts. What are the merits or otherwise of having a Speaker from within the House and a Speaker from outside the House?
Okay, we'll go with these 4 questions, and then after this, we'll get to the Facebook and YouTube.
Mr. Jeffrey, can I answer you first on the effects of the recent by-elections, I think, and it gives me the impression that you are dismayed at the outcome, and you have asked whether it would matter, whether parliamentary changes would matter at all. This is the point I was stating right at the outset. I don't think we ought to give up hope. 2 by-elections, 3 by-elections. In fact, we had more than 2. 2 state elections thereafter. Maybe the results were disappointing, but I think one need to look at the details of the results, and then you'll be able to form a real opinion. But whatever it is, even in a worst case scenario, it cannot be that Johor will dictate the outcome of GE15 so easily. I really don't think so. There could be several scenarios. There will be many pundits who will say this and that. One pundit said we will lose 2 cycles of general elections. I don't believe so. For that opinion, we have contrarian opinions. But what we need is hope and a determination to change. Right? I, like YB Sim, have hope in many of the MPs. I've singled them out in the book. The younger MPs and the female MPs, the ladies. Through my experience, I think they perform much, much better than the older MPs. I'm talking across the aisles. Even the opposition MPs, the old opposition MPs, tend to be not that great. But the younger MPs have got the gumption, have got the knowledge, to move forward. I think let's give our elections, our system a chance. I'm very confident Muda and all that will make an imprint, on the system. I said today, one constituency held by Muda in Johor. If only we can get 5 Muda MPs in GE14, that will be a turning point too. So what if we lose the next election? But if the government that comes in is not a strong government, there's still hope yet. But I would like to think that it's not going to be an easy run in the states at least. I think the opposition should keep the states that they have and do a much better job in the states that they have. And people change, people progress. The next round, who knows? Anyone's guess. If the youthful voters turn out in full force, you could see some real changes. After all, in GE14, people also gave up hope. I will never make it to the federal government. And look what happened, to our surprise. And people say that's why you all did such a long manifesto, over-promise, because you didn't think you'll achieve the federal government. We did. And of course, just don't give up hope. I don't believe you're going to see 54.6% turnout at GE15. It's 54.6 in Johor, but I don't think it's going to happen at the federal level. No. I could be proven wrong. 1 year from now, and they'll be, look, Sri Ariff got it all wrong. Fine. I would like to be proven wrong, but I don't think so. So I think that's my answer to Jeffrey. To Miss Sim, I get the impression that you thank you for highlighting the tribute to me and the Teresa Teng's song. I would like to listen to it. As for the special sitting, I did give a hint of certain confidential things that were within my province too. I knew a lot. I can tell you that. And I did mention in the book that even the PH MPs were not in favor of it. But mind you, it's not because of them that I decided the way I did. No, it was after I had already made up my mind. But they came to me and said, we don't want a special sitting. You ask them as a matter of record, because I can't say who came to see me and said what. But I put it in the book, so to that extent, I've made it public record. They were not in favor. And Sim was saying just now, quite rightly, at that time, very much state of flux. Some were in favor of Mr. X, some were not in favor of Mr. X, some were in favor of Mr. X today, tomorrow we're not in favor of Mr. X. It was moving very fast. People were betting more or less on who would win, who would get the majority of the votes. But I had to decide impartially as a speaker whether I should allow it. As I said, there were other things that I could have told you all, but I'm not going to, including what was told to me by people in AGC or whatever. So, but there was a decision taken, and I have no regrets on the decision that I took. Mr. Jimmy, is it Jimmy or Jim? Jim, asking me whether I remained as a member of Amanah when I was a speaker. Yes, I did, as an ordinary member. But I gave up all the other positions. In fact, I didn't even attend a single event except for one. I'm sorry, I forgot. I attended only for about 10 minutes, just for the opening ceremony, and then I left. Because I didn't want to be seen as implicated somehow, being impartial. Of course, weddings I attended, You have to separate politics from personal affairs. I attended Amana, wedding of Amana MP's children, and just as I attended UMNO's MP's children's wedding and so on and so on. As speaker, I get invited to all the sorts of functions, so I attended. So that leads to the question posed by Dr. Ahmad on that change, the change in the constitutional arrangement. I think it was there right from the start. This election to have a speaker from the outside, or as a speaker from the membership of MPs. Yeah? The first speaker, I think, came from the membership of MP, if I'm not mistaken. But subsequent speakers were not. Tan Sri Zahir, for instance, who became speaker for the longest period, was not an MP in the strict term of the word. In the Buku Harapan, it was actually part of the manifesto. Yes, for a speaker to be chosen from amongst the MPs. If you read the book, you'll see the reluctance that I had initially. I didn't really seek out to be a speaker because I thought you should follow the Pakatan Harapan manifesto. Yeah, but I was persuaded to because of certain changes, ironically, on the political front too. They wanted to have someone from PKR, Datuk Jo, as speaker. So I said, fine, he's a fantastic candidate. I said, I'll move out, don't elect me. Fine, have Datuk Jo as a speaker. But because of the equation in Kedah, that was not an option, a viable option. So I re-entered the race. Yeah? There are several views on it, whether it's better to have someone from the outside or someone from amongst the MPs. On the plus side, if you have someone from amongst the MPs, he would know the job better. So maybe, but he could do a much worse job, being partial and so on. If you get someone from outside, then you can perhaps rest assured that it could be independent. But look at the current speaker, I'm not quite sure whether he is. Yeah? So it's very difficult thing to decide. But why don't we adopt the British system? After all, we follow the Westminster system. The parliamentary speaker, Speaker of the House of Commons, is chosen from among the MPs. Right? Doesn't matter whether he's Labour or Conservative. But once he's chosen, he's more or less guaranteed that constituency. He gives up, all these party affiliations, except for being a member for that constituency as an MP for the political party. Right? But he takes no position in terms of party politics. Yeah? Just like Bako. John Bako was a Conservative MP, and he remained a Conservative MP throughout. Yeah? But they guaranteed him that constituency because he did such a good job. So when he stood for that constituency, it was uncontested. Because that is the kind of confidence that the House of Commons gave to John Bako, at least. He's a speaker elected by the entire House, just as the system here. Once he's elected by the entire House, the House will respect that decision, right? And give him free passage. Come a general election, just give him free passage. He becomes MP, but he becomes speaker until he's ousted or he retires. The current speaker, for instance, is not a Conservative member. He is from Labour. So it works in that system. But they have their own problems too. Bako has not got his peerage because they were not too happy with him. The Conservative Party was not too happy with him. So on balance, to answer the last question, on balance, I think it is better to have someone from amongst the MPs. Yeah? I think it's better. But make sure you get the right candidate. You know, make sure you get the right candidate. You get someone like Pandika Amin Mulia and all that. He was an MP. No, he was not. He wasn't. Even Pandika was an MP. He was an state assemblyman in Sabah, but then taken to federal level from the outside in a way. But he was member of DUT, Dewan Rakyat Negeri.
The Standing Order 81 provides for the composition of the Committee of Rights and Privileges. Basically, in bahasa it's called Jawatan Kuasa Hak dan Kebebasan. And they have 6 members. I can't recall all the members from the government side, but the opposition side we have 2, Ram Kapal and Samsul Iskandar Hang Tuah Jaya. So 2 of them. Problem is, it is not the committee that summon the P. It must be the speaker that make the decision to refer him to the committee. So the committee is powerless until the person is referred. Right. So from 2013, I don't recall anyone actually being asked to stand before the committee. You have, yeah. Okay. And I think for the task of the role of a speaker, Pakatan actually stipulated that we want a speaker from amongst the MP. So this is one the breaking of promise lah. You see, Ariff is one of the broken promises of PH. But I think it was a good thing in retrospective. Of course, as you said, and I mentioned it, in the beginning, some of us who were there since Pandika's time, we have seen and we thought speakers must behave this way, right? And when Tan Sri Ariff came about, we were thinking, my God, maybe because he's not from amongst us, he's not a career politician, so he doesn't know how to control politicians. So there were a lot of commotion. But looking back, we realized that he was actually, I like what he said in the book, something about the standing order is not used to impede the process of democracy in parliament, but to enable, depending on how you read it. Speakers like Pandika Amin, he has his strength, of course. He will use the standing order to limit the processes, to limit the role of MPs. But Tan Sri Ariff, on the other hand, interpret it in I don't know if I can use the word liberally, to enable, for example, the issue of Sungai Kim Kim, allow the emergency motion in less than 24 hours for Hassan Karim. So I think this is where where we give allowance to the suitable person rather than limiting it from whichever pool it comes from. We give allowance to the most suitable person to be in that seat. I will not say the same with other political appointees during PH time. I will not mention it here. Some political party outside of political party, outside of career politicians, career MPs, I will not say the same to some of this. But I think in the case of looking back, it was an apt decision by the leadership at that time.
On the Committee of Rights and Privileges, there are 2 instances that can happen. One is what we call a summary power of the speaker, not to be recommended, because Pandika used it once against Anwar Ibrahim, suspended him for only half a year, 6 months or so. The other is, this is the usual situation, where you have a recalcitrant MP, someone who's flouted the rules or whatever, and the speaker feels that he should be suspended for a longer period, not like what we see nowadays, 1 day, half day, 3 days, maximum 5 days. Some of them are awful, so you need to suspend for a longer period. But there's a catch there. it depends on the minister, or any minister of the government, from the government side for that matter, to introduce a motion, to refer that person to the Committee of Rights and Privileges. Not quite right that has not happened recently. I had two. I had two. One was Bosku, aka Najib Razak, and the other, of course, is Tajuddin, Pasir Salak. But those two were referred to the committee by way of a motion, passed by the House. Of course, it led to a lot of commotion, especially the one against Najib Razak. Yeah? But we held the meetings. Najib came to answer the charges. Tajuddin also came, had to answer the charges, gave them full rights of representation, including the right to call their own witnesses and so on and so forth. But because I was booted out midstream, so I don't know what really happened to the two committees. Nothing, probably. Actually, the proceedings against Najib were completed. It was at the stage of coming to a decision. I don't know what happened, actually. I didn't want to follow up on that because, well, beyond my time. Towards the end. But it can be used. But there's a lesson here. The lesson is the system can only work if people play ball. You can have a powerful and fair speaker, but if you have a minister in charge of parliament who's not willing to also play by the rules of the game, then you get stuck. I think this is the danger that we are seeing today. I had no problems. I made it clear in the book. I have my respect to Datuk Liu, the late Datuk Liu, and Hanifah Maidin. And they understood the separation of powers, and they understood we all had our respective functions, and we need to cooperate fully. That's why I managed to have the Kim Kim matter debated in the main chamber. Nowadays, no. The speaker has said, okay, it's a matter of public importance. You go to the small chamber, the special chamber, Khabar Khas. But that's no good. On a matter of tremendous public importance, we must have a full debate. Full TV transmission. Public must listen, must be able to, listen to what MPs have to say. Not the special chamber, the Khabar Khas, where you'll be lucky if you can pack in 15 persons. I think the most comfortable will be about only 8 or so. It's a very small chamber. And I wanted to find another room, actually, to have a bigger room like what the Australians have in terms of their federation committee, federation chamber. And then, of course, it will be different. But nothing beats having the debate on the floor of the main chamber. So we did all the right things. I spoke to Datuk Liu, I spoke to Hanifah Maidin. In fact, I spoke to all the ministers, except probably not the minister in charge, because she was in Johor. She was at ground zero. But the rest, I spoke to them. And they all understood the need to have this debate. I called them up individually, of course, through Datuk Liu and also Hanifah. Say, let's have this. I say, come. We better come and explain to the Rakyat. And they voluntarily came. I expected maybe 2 or 3, but 6 came. Or was it 7? They all came. And so in the book I said, I take off my hat with respect to them. Give them my respect to them. They came and they all realized it was important for them to have come and explain to the country. And Hassan Karim, the mover of the motion, was himself satisfied. Yes, government did whatever they could. We don't need a local emergency declared because in effect, they were already having all those powers. And there the matter rested. So that's why I hope the current speaker, whoever comes before him or after him, should use the rules with discretion, understand fully the meaning of the rules, and likewise the minister in charge of parliament should also understand beyond the rules. That's why it's so important to understand the basic principles. So that's the little that I know about Najib Razak and Proses Salak. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri and YB. The Secretariat will read out questions from our Facebook and YouTube viewers, and I think that might.
Yes, okay. We have few questions from our YouTube viewers. One is from Ruben Joseph. This question is to Tan Sri Ariff and YB Sim. What are the one word change in the daily parliamentary prayer? All right. Another question is from Gizat Ghazali. This is to Tan Sri Ariff. MP Neil Parish resigned from the House of Commons. Is there any such manner that can happen in Dewan Rakyat without calling for a by-election? And Giza also have another question to YB Stephen. Do you think we should stop electing the same person to be both MP and assemblyman? Are we short of balance? That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, the first question, what is the one word change that is done for the daily parliamentary prayer?
Even the prayer is part of the standing orders, right? And standing orders have to be approved, right, eventually by Parliament, by resolution of Parliament. So we do not know whether that was done in that case. If it was done, then there's no issue. Yeah, there's no issue. So that's a technical answer to that. It's a word only. And the second question is, what was that?
What is it about any man?
MP resigning without a by-election. There is a provision in the Constitution, within a certain window, you don't need to have by-election. I think 6 months or so, and before the expiry of the parliamentary term, then you don't need to have a by-election. But otherwise, you must have a by-election, But you will remember there are 2 by-elections which have not been held because they declared emergency powers. Yeah. One concerns Datuk Liu's constituency. Yeah. Until today, we don't have a by-election. Yeah. So I don't know how the rules are played out. Yeah. So there you are. The talk now is to have a by-election, not only when an MP resigns, but when he hops. I think that will be a good thing. It must be done. To bring stability to the system, it must be done. After all, we're so used to by-elections, so what's another by-election or several? So I think it will be good for the system. It happens in all other countries. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to answer the second question first. Whether a person should contest for both parliamentary and state seat. I think this is a party strategy, and both sides of the political divide do practice such strategy, and it depends on the constituent whether to vote for somebody whom they think is already burdened with another seat. But on the opposition side, I think the context for opposition doing this is twofold. Number one is because it is more difficult to get candidates to stand on an opposition ticket, especially a party like the AP. In the past, we used to have to persuade people to come and contest because they know chances are you will not win. So that's one. But on the other hand, if key leaders, for example, the Chief Minister of Penang was granted permission by the party to contest in 2 seats because being a federal opposition at that time, we wanted our chief minister to represent the state as well in parliament. We wanted the chief minister to have a voice in parliament. So that basically this is a political strategy by different parties. I can't speak for PKL or even Barisan National, etc. But at least for DAP, this was some of the context behind the strategy to allow a person to contest in 2 seats. The one word different. The one word different was this. It's the word muslihat. Okay. The context of the sentence is bagi mentadbir muslihat masyarakat pergaulan. So this was the original one, bagi mentadbir muslihat masyarakat pergaulan. It was changed in 2018 to bagi mentadbir maslahat masyarakat pergaulan. So the word muslihat was changed to maslahat. Muslihat basically is an older word. Of course, today we understand muslihat as trickeries, but the older word, and I've referred to some of the language experts, it meant the interactions of community interactions, muslihat. Maslahat, of course, refers to good deeds. Right? So that was changed. So I concur with the speaker. If it's approved by the House, then it's okay because it is part of the standing order. But if it's not, I think the due process should be done. So this is one word. There is one interesting tidbits of encounter I had with the speaker, which was not written in his book, because both he and I already forgotten about this issue. But somehow I felt it's interesting because nobody realized that there was a one word was changed in the standing order. And I think in Parliament sometimes, no matter how judiciously we interpret the standing order, some form of decorum must be observed. So I think this is one.
One big short of time, but I must mention this. One things I've not mentioned in the book, the idea of APPG, All Party Parliamentary Group. I'm grateful that this idea is still being continued, not by the executive, by the MPs. It was meant to be like that right from the start, because something we borrowed from UK. MPs and certain outside groups can gather together and form an all-party parliamentary group. I'm so glad they have a very active parliamentary group now called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Political Funding. It was fantastic. You don't need to have the government to sponsor it. You just set it up. It's a simple process. Speaker registers it, and that's it. So I would highly recommend for civil society persons, activists, to use this formula together with the MPs. It will form the bridge between Parliament and civil society on any topic of concern. Then we have one. The first one that we introduced was the APPG on sustainable development. Still, it's very active. Yeah. Yeah, we can give about 2 million to them, I think, initially. So it is an idea that is worthwhile pursuing. Anything, for that matter. Yeah? So that citizens can get involved directly with parliamentarians. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all that we have time for tonight. And for the question and answer session, we've reached the end of our program. I really can't say more than just like to express my appreciation, our appreciation on behalf of Penang Institute, and gratitude for both Tan Sri and YB for accepting the invitation. Also to thank everybody for coming, and those who are still with us on Facebook and YouTube, thank you for being with us virtually. Thank you all. Have a good night and have a good weekend.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Tan Sri. Before you get to do that, just want to thank you for all.
Oh yeah,